The night sky over the North Atlantic trembled under the thundering rotors of RAF Coastal Command Sunderland flying boats. A German U-boat, U-521, cut through the icy water at flank speed, its conning towers slick with frost. Inside the cramped steel tube, Oberleutnant Karl Fischer, a 27-year-old officer from Hamburg, wiped condensation from his periscope lens. Hydrophone contact bearing 085. A radio man shouted over the pulsing hum of the engines. Karl's stomach tightened. For days they had stalked an Allied convoy, waiting for the perfect moment. But now it was the hunters who were being hunted. Above them, the Sunderland's searchlight knifed through the night as the pilot muttered to his co-pilot, "Hold her steady. If we lose them in this fog, command will have our hide." The aircraft's Merlin engines roared like angry giants, their vibrations echoing across the water. The sudden explosion rocked the U-boat, knocking sailors from their bunks. The lights flickered, then died. Emergency red lamps glowed like fresh wounds across the interior. "Depth charges," shouted the chief engineer. The hull groaned as water surged through ruptured seams. Karl clung to a valve wheel to steady himself. He could hear sailors praying under their breath. "Heilige Maria," muttered Gotz. The U-boat's captain, Captain Lieutenant Armin Weber, forced calm into his voice. "Flood bow tanks. Hard to port. We must break contact." But their fate was sealed. The next series of detonations lifted the stern out of the water and slammed it back down. Cookware clattered, gauges shattered, and fire broke out in the aft battery compartment. Poisonous chlorine fumes began to fill the passageways. "Surface. Surface now," Weber barked. The U-boat burst upward, breaking through the waves just as the Sunderland swooped low, its guns spitting fire. Tracer rounds ricocheted off the conning tower. Karl stumbled to the hatch, hands trembling, and raised a white cloth torn from a bunk sheet. For a moment, time seemed to stop. The British gunner hesitated. The pilot's voice crackled through the intercom. "They're surrendering. Hold fire." Floodlights washed over the damaged submarine as British sailors from an escort corvette closed in with rifles ready. Karl raised his hands, breathing in the cold night air. He expected interrogation, perhaps a British prison camp, maybe Scotland or Canada, but the officer of the boarding party told them something that pierced him deeper than any bullet. "You lads won't be staying here. You're being transferred to the Americans." Karl swallowed hard. He knew nothing about America except for propaganda. Skyscrapers, factories, and a population too large to imagine. He wondered if they would survive the journey. The prisoners were ushered onto the American Liberty ship SS Fremont, escorted by U.S. Navy personnel. Every clang of the ship's steel echoed through its cavernous hull. Karl and the others were exhausted and defeated, but it was what they saw on board that first shook them. The American crew moved with a relaxed confidence. There was music playing, big band jazz, broadcast through the ship's speakers. Sailors joked while loading crates of food. Canned meat, fruit, fresh bread, coffee. Luxuries compared to the rations Germans had back home. "Are these supplies for a year?" one POW whispered. A U.S. sailor laughed. "A year? Buddy, this is just for our next few weeks." Days later, the ship reached Hampton Roads, Virginia. Karl stared in disbelief as they approached the port. Endless rows of cranes, railways, smokestacks, and assembly lines stretched farther than the eye could see. Cargo ships were being loaded at a speed that defied logic. Trains rumbled in every direction. Massive factories belched steam like iron giants. It was one thing to hear about American industry. It was another to stand before it and feel its mechanical heartbeat pulsing through the ground. One POW murmured, "My God, how do we win against this?" They were transported inland to Camp Butner, North Carolina, a sprawling POW facility with barracks, basketball courts, farm fields, and a fully staffed hospital. Karl felt confusion rising in him. This wasn't the brutal prison the German officers warned about. An American guard shook his hand. "Welcome to Butner. You follow rules, you'll be treated fine." That night, Karl lay awake listening to unfamiliar sounds. Trains, distant machinery, cicadas humming. He realized the most terrifying part wasn't the weapons America possessed, but the capacity to build more than any nation on Earth. Weeks passed, and the POWs were eventually assigned to work details under the Geneva Convention, mostly agricultural labor on nearby farms. Karl worked beside American civilians who treated him with surprising courtesy. One farmer, John Miller, handed Karl a lunch pail. "Eat. You boys work hard. Hard workers get fed well." Karl blinked. "But we are prisoners." Miller shrugged. "Son, everybody can be decent." It challenged everything Karl had been taught, but the war still raged elsewhere. The camp radio delivered news daily: Normandy landings, the fall of Paris, the collapse of the Eastern Front. Karl and the others listened in silence. Their faces paled. He imagined his family in Hamburg as Allied bombers. B-17 flying fortresses and B-24 liberators rained destruction on the city he once knew. He wondered if they were alive. Months later, after Germany surrendered, an officer gathered the POWs. "For many of you, it will soon be time to go home." Some cheered. Some cried. Karl simply stared at the horizon, realizing how much the world had changed and how much he had changed with it. The prisoner exchange ship departed from New York months later, carrying hundreds of German POWs back toward a country they no longer recognized. Karl stood on the deck, watching the Statue of Liberty shrink into the distance. The harbor behind him was a maze of cranes, refineries, and factories, structures that seemed to breathe and grow like living organisms. He remembered the first time he had seen American industry, towering and relentless. Now, as he sailed away, he understood why Germany had lost. Not because its soldiers lacked courage, not because its commanders lacked strategy, but because no amount of willpower could overcome a nation capable of producing ships faster than they could be sunk, tanks faster than they could be burned, and planes faster than they could be shot down. He thought of the farmers, the guards, the trains moving day and night, the steel melting and reforming into weapons, the cities alive with motion. He had seen a country whose real strength was not hatred, but unity. Millions of workers, immigrants, families, engineers, and soldiers all pushing together toward one goal. The Atlantic wind whipped across the deck. Karl closed his eyes. He felt no bitterness, only understanding. War had shown him destruction. Captivity had shown him humanity. And America had shown him the staggering cost of industrial power, not just in machinery, but in the lives required to fuel it. When Germany finally appeared on the horizon, ruins, rubble, smoke, Karl felt the weight of history settle on his shoulders. He whispered into the wind, "We fought with courage, but the world was bigger than we ever knew." The ship drifted slowly toward the homeland he no longer recognized, and Karl understood the final lesson of his long journey. In war, victory is measured not only in battles won, but in the sacrifices made, the truths revealed, and the humanity rediscovered when the guns finally fall silent.